It looks like our recording has started, which is super exciting. And good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are joining in from at the moment. But I'm so excited to be here with you and, unite as ESP professionals and hopefully learn together just maybe some tips and tricks along the way that help us be better with the extension programming that we do. And so I appreciate Travis's kind introduction. By trade, I'm a natural scientist and environmental scientist at heart. And so have morphed certainly into the technology world and appreciate the great things that technology can do to help us and hopefully be better at our jobs, and especially as we do the tough work every single day in extension. I just want to first say I appreciate the great things that you do. I come from an extension family where both of my grandfathers worked for land-grant universities. One helped as a research technician, so that part of the land-grant mission. One was an ag econ professor. And so I kind of get to round out that trifecta of working for extension and doing public service and outreach. And so just appreciate you for joining us, but more importantly, appreciate you for the great things that you do each and every day to serve those people all across your state. So I do intend for this to be hopefully engaging as much as Zoom can be engaging, and talk a little bit about graphic organizers and how you could potentially use these for the programming that you offer an extension. Throughout our time together, though, if you have questions, feel free to pop those in the chat and let me know. Travis is going to help me monitor that. If for some reason you're asking a question that is super specific to the topic at hand or the piece of information right then and there, and I miss it, you do not hurt my feelings at all if you unmute and say, hey, Kasey, take a pause, take a breath, and answer this question before we move forward. My job, of course, is to make your job easier as we learn together. And at the end, I do intend to hop into Microsoft PowerPoint. I don't work for Microsoft, but I will endorse Microsoft PowerPoint all day, every day. I love the program. I love everything about the program. And so we'll actually hop in there and together and look at some great ways that you can use graphic organizers in your work. So with that, we're going to get started, making sure that the slide has changed. Everything is good to go. So just welcome. So excited that you're here. I work as an extension specialist in the 4-H department here at the University of Georgia, and my primary responsibilities relate to our science programs. And so regardless though of how you came today or what you primarily represent, my intention is, just like ESP serves all of our extension professionals, hopefully there's a little bit of something that you can glean from this and use in your own work. So what I hope for us to do today is 3 main things. One of those, just talk a little bit about the importance of great visual aids and graphic organizers, and almost the research or science behind how they can be helpful and useful in education. The second thing is really to learn about the different types of graphic organizers, potentially how they can be used, and then we'll hop over there into Microsoft PowerPoint and see some quick demos about using them and creating them in such a way that it is meaningful and relevant to your own work. So a great visual aid, and I think back to, I was one of those 4-H members that stood up in front of a group of people and gave a presentation in the 5th grade, and I had posters that were put together with some rubber cement, and probably were a little ruffled by the time I got it to the presentation spot anyway, but those were my visual aids. And so I think so much when we do programming and extension, having some sort of visual aid, many times it is now a PowerPoint presentation or something that utilizes technology, but there's other visual aids out there as well. But what a great effective visual aid is going to do, it's going to consider that audience. You're going to think about your environment, and you're going to think about your message. And so as I certainly both when I worked as a 4-H agent And now, as an extension specialist, think about those things, and really helps drive what I am trying to create and really the intention behind what we're trying to accomplish. So it's more than just the message. We also have to certainly consider that audience and that environmental piece as well. And just realize a visual aid in one context may be very effective, and in another context may not, for a variety of different reasons. And so also something important to know is what we're really focusing in on today are these graphic organizers. And don't get freaked out by the names and the processes and the science and the scholarship part. Simply put, when we look at a graphic organizer, this is where we use a lot of times symbols or shapes. And what we're trying to do is connect and show the relationships between the concepts that are being represented here. So circles and lines and maybe some triangles and squares thrown in there. But essentially, we're trying to take a lot of information that typically would be, shared via paragraph form or text form, if you will, and organize it in such a way that we use graphics and shapes and, like I said, lines and arrows to really show those relationships so that it's easier for not only you as that presenter, but hopefully your audience to, again, take in that message and let it be something that is successful. So you probably have seen graphic organizers before. You may actually use them, and you may use them and don't quite even know the name behind them, which all of that is, of course, completely acceptable. They are ways to visually organize these thoughts and concepts. What's great is that they can really help show relationships among that content that you're looking at, the words and pictures and so on and so forth. I love to doodle. I don't necessarily claim to be an artist at hand, but I to process information have to write it out, have to kind of sketch it out. So for me to see shapes and arrows and lines, and just like you see over here on the right side, that box and those kind of levels and sub levels, it helps me better understand content rather than just reading a paragraph about something. Graphic organizers are great because it could be used in an individual setting or perhaps a group setting, which likely most of us are comfortable with in extension. The best thing, though, it does not require a lot of additional prep work, and certainly it is easy for you to incorporate in whatever learning environment that may be. The other really nice thing is that it really helps in terms of accessibility. And so the Learning Disabilities Association of America actually encourages people to use things like graphic organizers and other ways to connect with people that may have some sort of learning disability. Typically, these people process information a little bit more visually. Obviously, these are people with just a learning disability in general, not those with a visual impairment. But those people also typically will better understand ideas and words and concepts when they are associated with some sort of picture or a diagram or a chart. And so I think it's a great way as we continue to make sure our programs are accessible for people. You may have audience members that don't disclose that to you. And so incorporating that into what you do is really great. Somebody already threw in there in the chat box, having a graphic organizer is a nice feature when using a newsletter as well. I was the kid who loved to read. I still love to read as an adult. But let me tell you, when I see a page of like all words, it gets a little intimidating. When I see a page with some graphics and pictures and circles and lines and a little bit of text, I am much more willing and ready to take in that information and digest it. So other things when it comes to the research about graphic organizers, there's a couple different studies out there, especially with students in that formal K-12 classroom, about those with cognitive disabilities. Those that had been exposed to content using graphic organizers typically retain that information better than those that did not have graphic organizers in their education. And so the other thing that you can see some other studies as well, because students come with those various levels of performance and modes of learning and backgrounds and things like that. That all goes into how people learn. And so when I say students there, I mean collectively, both young people and adults. And so when you have this whole idea of a universal design for learning, that is a larger overarching concept. But when we use something like a graphic organizer, it can be very, very positive, so that everybody has access to that content through those multiple means of, I love these words, engagement, representation, and expression. And simply put, graphic organizers are tools that help your brain think. And I don't know about you, but I always love a good tool that's going to get my brain thinking and working as I am either exposed to content that may be new, and certainly exposed to content that I may have been taught at one point but need a refresher and things like that. So a lot of times I think back to my experiences, both as a young person and as an adult learner, and what do I like and enjoy in a learning setting. And so I really take that to heart when I design my own workshops and sessions. And so graphic organizers are definitely a part of that. So we're going to jump into some different examples of graphic organizers, and certainly let you kind of see what these could potentially look like, and then certainly how this could be infused into your own extension work and programming. I'll do my best to represent multiple program areas and not just put on my 4-H hat for a minute, but put the one on that's above that, which is truly cooperative extension and the great public service and outreach that we do. Certainly, if you have ideas or suggestions, those could be thrown in the chat box as well. And I'm also going to say, if this is something that's relatively new content and information to you, don't get too stuck in the idea that, like, oh, it has to look a certain way, or, oh, I didn't use the right tool or the right shape or the right arrow or line. That's not the case at all. Like, the reality is, put forth an effort, and certainly think about what relationships you're trying to build. But if you use something like a Venn diagram, and maybe a bubble map would have been more helpful, like, that's okay. Part of it is as a great educator is that we continue to learn and grow, and maybe even push ourselves sometimes out of our own comfort zone. So really what I'm intending here is for us just to look at some examples. One of them, sometimes called a bubble map or a concept map, probably at some point in your formal schooling, you use this as a brainstorming opportunity where you put likely a topic in the middle, and there were different ideas or descriptors of that potential topic that kind of came off of that centralized idea. And just either you did little lines or even little lines and circles. Anytime I can draw, I'm going to draw. So I like lines and circles to think about, hey, here's my main topic, and here are all these descriptors that could potentially work with this topic. So very easy and effective to understand. So when I think of something like food safety, for those of us who work in that area, certainly there could be paragraphs upon paragraphs about food safety. And there are publications that are miles and miles long. My mom is Serve Safe certified through UGA Extension, and loves to shout that out, especially at family barbecues and things like that. But that Serve Safe manual, y'all, it's big. It is bulky. And so if you wanted to do a quick little overview of what are some things to consider when we're thinking about food safety, even as a brainstorming way, something like this, that again is quick, it's easy, it's to the point. You can easily see food safety there in the middle, and then all of these little descriptors or ideas about food safety around that outside there. So things like separating your cutting boards, and making sure that chicken's cooked to 165 on the inside, and washing those hands. It doesn't have to have all the details and information, but it just shows again how you can take one particular topic and have those descriptors. If you wanted to zero in a little bit further, just hand and surface washing, that could potentially be that center bubble. And then you could talk about all the things that go into that piece of it. But this is a really easy way, again, to communicate with that audience of, hey, this is what we're going for. This is what we're trying to accomplish here. And the reality is, there wasn't a lot of reading that had to take place for either the facilitator or those students. And I use that word student a loosely participant, if you will. But it just was something simple and easy to digest and understand along the way. Another one of my favorite graphic organizers, and probably one at some point in your schooling you may have seen as well, is that idea of a Venn diagram, where you have two circles and they have an overlapping part in the middle there, where one circle is going to show those items and ideas that are unique characteristics to a particular topic. The other circle will show where that particular item or topic or ideas are unique. And then that overlapping piece is where you would see those similarities. So, especially when we're thinking about educating people, I love to go back to Bloom's taxonomy. And so, when we think about that kind of triangle, if you will, and we start at the bottom and work our way up to that top piece where we're really trying to help students develop those critical thinking skills and problem solving and things like that, comparing and contrasting a Venn diagram is a great way to do that. And again, this is something for both adults and young people. So if you wanted to do something very, very simple here, plants and animals, right? So plants have some certain characteristics that you see there on the left that are unique to plants. Animals, on the other hand, have some certain characteristics that are certainly unique to them. But in the middles, where they're that overlap, they're both living organisms and they're both multicellular. We could even talk about they both have a nucleus in their cells, or they both have a cell membrane that's present, but then you see something like the cell wall where it is indeed different. And so this was a very simple explanation, a simple example, but this could be done with a lot of things. I have a weird passion for invasive species. I know that sounds kind of crazy, but I love to compare like an invasive species and a native species and see sometimes how they are very, very similar. So that would be listed there in the middle, but then of course what their differences are and how perhaps that invasive can encroach on the native or something like that. So again, a Venn diagram is a really easy way. I could have read a slide that talks all about plants and a slide that talks all about animals, but instead here's a very nice visual representation of some of that content that I would want to cover. And of course, as a facilitator, you would spend a little bit more time than I am on all these examples, but our goal today is just talking about the different types of graphic organizers and how those exist. I also love to show like processes and steps along the way. So if you have something that may be very cyclical in nature, so kind of meaning we start at one step, we work our way through those steps, and then we begin again. This would be an easy way to show something like that. Those of us in the 4-H world are very familiar with David Kolb's experiential learning model. And so we have young people go through that process in the great work that we do. And so we want them to explore, then share, then process, then generalize, and then apply. I could also come in here and put some smaller descriptors within these circles that kind of reinforce what these ideas are, if that's helpful. But again, instead of reading a whole manuscript or a whole slide with all this information, very easy to see it in that graphic organizer type form. And the same thing could be true with a linear process. So instead of it repeating after so many steps, it kind of starts and ends. When I used to work in a county extension office, we were in a coastal community and had a very large military installation there. And so we had a lot of people that would come to us to do water tests because those that were getting homeowner loans through the military agency always were required to get a water test, even if it was something like city municipal kind of water. And so we did a lot of water samples in our community. And let me tell you something: when you gave people a page front and back of text with all the things they need to do, they didn't understand it, and we would get water samples that weren't taken correctly, or we would have to go back and they would have to do it again or pay for it again. And there was a lot of missteps along the way. And so we took something and reworked it so that it was way more visually appealing. And folks really appreciated that and resonated with that. The same thing, I'm certainly thinking of our friends today down in Georgia and even parts of, or sorry, down in Florida and even parts of southern Georgia, with this hurricane that is crossing the land there. Many times after one of those storms, we would do education as it related to proper wells and making sure that they have been chlorinated and disinfected and treating after there was that rainwater that comes in, or perhaps even saltwater intrusion with the oceans and things like that. So rest assured, if I'm trying to teach somebody how to shock that well, having something like this linear process was much easier for both of me to visually kind of point through and verbally talk about, and certainly easier for those homeowners as well, pun intended. But really the reality is to be able to, instead of having documents and pages of words, something that's visually appealing and helps folks out. I also love to show kind of relationships, and this is really where you can get into this idea of having these branch type maps. So where you have this one main idea in different categories that would fall within these that main topic, if you will, a little bit different than that bubble map or that concept map at the beginning, because that the order didn't really matter in a lot of ways, and these were descriptors. Whereas here, we're trying to truly show relationships. So whatever that main idea may be. So for example, we learned about those 3 rock types there in earth science class at some point, and we knew they were igneous, sedimentary, and metamorphic. So based on this map here, we can see that out of the different types of rocks, they can be one of 3 types, either igneous, sedimentary, and metamorphic. And then a lot of times in the natural world, we do continue to classify things. So, within the certain plant family or certain animal family or something like that, we could further classify into different groups. And this is such a great way to do it. And it is very intentional because these lines are showing the relationship between and among all of the concepts. You could also do this horizontally as well. This is really just a visual preference and kind of what you may be comfortable with, and or maybe your participants too. So this one gets a little bit more complicated. And simply, I did it in a this horizontal type format only because it gets a little long going vertical, and slides are meant to be wide horizontally. So I could easily just switch this to the vertical if I needed to. But when we think about plants, so anything that's classified as a plant falls into one of 2 categories. They're either non-vascular or vascular in nature. So very few things are non-vascular. Mosses are a good example of that. Most plants we know of are going to be vascular. Those vascular plants fall into 2 groups, either seeded or non-seeded. So non-seeded things are like ferns that actually reproduce with spores, but most plants are also going to be seeded in nature, and then they fall into different categories as well, gymnosperms and angiosperms. So you can see how something like this is very visually appealing. I've talked to you just a little bit about plants, but at the same time, it's starting to trigger your mind to see those relationships. I don't have to put in every single things like, hey, ferns are non-seeded and they reproduce with spores and all that details and information, because you don't necessarily need it, right? Those are those extra pieces that likely your participants may write down, or certainly you have the ability to repeat if needed. But what we're trying to do here is we're showing how plants are organized. Something like this in that branch type format, just horizontally instead of vertically, really gives us the opportunity to do that. And then there's this super fancy Frayer model. Many of the schools that I have worked with really use this when they're trying to do vocabulary words with students. But the reality is we could do this with adult audiences too. So we're introducing a new word there in the middle. And then what's kind of fun is that you draw 4 little boxes around that word. One of them, you kind of put forth the definition. You have characteristics, examples, and non-examples. I've also seen this done before where instead of having a non-example box, you have to draw or illustrate, which again is just a fun way to think about what is that main concept there in the beginning, in the middle, and then some different ways that we can define it, some of those characteristics, and then examples, or like I mentioned, either non-examples and or drawings or something like that. So particularly when a new concept is being introduced, if you can't tell by now, I am a science dork, and so love plants, I love astronomy, love just about everything we've talked about today. Food safety and microbiology, my heart flutters a little bit when I get to see something fun and exciting under the microscope. So but when we think about something like, okay, what is truly a planet? And I think about poor little Pluto. So was named a planet in 1930, hadn't even made it around the sun before it got demoted to a dwarf planet. So what does that mean, and how do we define a planet? And so we can have that definition, those characteristics, examples, non-examples, and things like that. And maybe if we want to do again some of that higher order pieces, you do this for something like a planet and a dwarf planet, and then you can do some of that comparing and contrasting. Just depends on how deep you really want to go. So why graphic organizers are so important? Again, we kind of hit the high points on some of them that you can make. And certainly we have to think about the why piece before we just start diving in. We also don't want a graphic organizer on every handout or PowerPoint or something like that that we create either, because that's not going to be helpful too. So it really is an art in some ways, figuring out how to make the most based on what you're trying to accomplish. So one of the things that excites me the most is that you could have graphic organizers almost as like a handout or a worksheet type experience, so that you as a presenter, if you're sharing those slides with people, let me tell you something. If somebody gives me like a handout to kind of fill out while they're presenting, like I am bought in 100%. I realize not everybody's like me, and you don't have to be, and that's okay. But for me, if you were to give me something that's almost guided as that presenter is going along, I'm going to buy in. I'm going to fill in those words or pictures or text or draw the lines that are really needed. So definitely it can be used as that guide or even potentially that assessment tool. And we'll talk about that here in a few minutes. So know that the graphic organizer, it could be completely empty so that you would have those participants fill in all of those parts, or it could potentially be partially filled, where you maybe have filled in some of those words and concepts and that those attendees would do the rest. You also may want to consider to provide something like a word bank, especially if you're using it as an assessment tool, and definitely with younger audiences. So maybe as an adult, that may not be needed, but it is also helpful and relevant and useful. And guys, nobody's gonna say like, "How dare you helped your audience with a word bank," right? So if you're doing things like a food safety presentation, or maybe you're talking about how to grow a satsuma as a type of mandarin orange in southern Georgia, and you provide some words that people then would later fill in their graphic organizers. What a great way to connect with your audience, or what a great way to use as a potential assessment tool of, hey, at the end of this, you can look and see if people were accurately able to complete this graphic organizer based on the information you gave them. Now, one word of caution is that if you are going to use a graphic organizer as an assessment tool, I would make sure that in that presentation or in that learning experience, they have seen that already being used, because nothing would be more intimidating than seeing a completely blank, branch chart, or even horizontally going down or vertically. And it's like fill in all the words and you're like, I don't know what to do because I've never seen this before. But if you think back to, oh yeah, I remember that instructor was talking about these things, and thinking about those relationships again between and among those words, it's definitely going to be really, really helpful. Somebody mentioned there in the chat box that you can certainly make it more tactile and hands-on by doing things like large chart paper, post-it notes, 2 hula hoops for a diagram or for a Venn diagram. Maybe that's my next slide. It is coming up. There we go. Perfect timing, right? So this was an example that I did with a group of students. And so we were talking about habitats, and we were going to eventually relate this to animals. So hang tight with me. But first, we had to talk about the ideas of wants versus needs. So you see, we had one hula hoop labeled wants, one hula hoop labeled needs, and then I had just a ton of items, right? So you look, there's like some flip flops, there's a game, there's in the middle there a book, space, because space is kind of hard to represent, but every organism needs a little bit of space to live. There's some other toys there. There's some things like food. So there was just a bag of rice, a bottle of water. And so my students had to sort out these into the idea of wants and needs. And rest assured, as an adult, I would have been hands-on all in doing this as well. So we had to think about how this became way more interactive than me just flashing up a PowerPoint slide and saying, hey, y'all, what are some wants? What are some needs? Let's move on, right? Everybody got an item. I had a little mystery bag, so they got to draw their item out of the bag. There was a lot of suspense along the way. We got to go outside, sort these out. What a fun way to, again, use quote unquote a graphic organizer. Yet what we're trying to do is really show the relationships between and among all the things going on here. Another fun way, like I said, is to use it as that assessment tool. So here is a potential example. This does get a little complicated, and y'all have already learned plants are near and dear to my heart. But we do teach a plant classification lesson for some of our students in our different 4-H programs. This exact graphic organizer, right? All of those boxes with the words filled in is part of that presentation. So these youth have already been exposed and saw that plants are divided into 2 groups, non-vascular and vascular. And we talked about, okay, so here's some examples of non-vascular plants: mosses, hornworts, liverworts. We passed around pictures. Moss is something usually pretty easy that I actually dig up and bring into the classroom, right? So they have had exposure to all of this. So then at the end of the lesson, they actually would complete this activity. What was great is that I had a super strong partnership with these teachers. And so they would actually review them and say, hey, you know, this classroom of students out of 24 students, X percentage got 4 more correct, or we would figure out what those kind of numbers would be, if you will, for some of that impact reporting. And then my students were actually able to put these in their STEM journals, and they had this as some documentation of that day they learned about how plants were classified, which was pretty cool stuff. So that was a lot, and my intentions were probably not to talk as fast as I did, because I get excited about really dorky stuff like graphic organizers and totally own it as a badge of courage for sure. But wanted to see, there were some great comments there in the chat box, but wanted to take a quick pause and see if anybody had any questions. And then what we'll do for our last little bit of time together, talk about how to build these, especially using Microsoft PowerPoint as kind of our base, because it can look really intimidating and scary, and it's not. And so certainly there have been times when I have done it the hard way and tried to insert my own shapes and things like that. And the beauty about it is that really this whole idea of a SmartArt feature in PowerPoint can set you up for a lot of success. So I'm going to be quiet for a hot second, see if any chat comments come in, and or if you're comfortable unmuting, we can do that as well. All right, so here in a few minutes, I'm actually going to stop sharing this PowerPoint and instead just pull up a blank presentation in Microsoft PowerPoint. So at the top of PowerPoint, which we'll see this together, but there's this little insert ribbon, and then there is a feature called SmartArt. And so this is essentially what pops up. This is a screenshot of what it looks like. And I really like over on the left side, there's a column that kind of talks about all the different types of smart art. So if you're trying to list something out, this is the example that you can do this with. If you're trying to show something like a cycle or some hierarchy or a pyramid or something like that, they have kind of already grouped them for you, which is really helpful. And then when you click on one of the examples over in the bottom right, which I'll tell you, sometimes I'm a little too quick and I'm like, ooh, picked one, go, let's make this happen. But over in the bottom right, PowerPoint actually gives you an idea about how to potentially use this specific smart art graphic. So the one that I have highlighted there, it's called the basic block list. Super boring, but it's really pretty. But when you look at it, it says could be potentially used to show non-sequential or group blocks of information. Maximizes both horizontal and vertical display space for shapes. So just you can try to trigger in your head, hey, this may be the best use of this potential smart art graphic. Now, you don't always have to listen to Microsoft by any means, but sometimes that helps me think through what exactly am I trying to do here? Is it just text? Is it text and photos? Are we just trying to list something out? Are we trying to show perhaps a relationship piece of this or a process or something like that? So I really try to make sure I pay attention and kind of read some of those tips, just so that I am a little bit better prepared and equipped as I build that experience for my participants to hopefully be successful. So with that, we're going to practice together. And of course, when I exit out of PowerPoint, it immediately wants to stop sharing my screen, which is not my intentions, but it's how technology works. So you all may be familiar with Microsoft PowerPoint. It's a pretty common software application that's supported by most institutions. When you open up PowerPoint, this is likely what you're going to see. I will give you a caveat. If you're working on PowerPoint via like the cloud, the kind of online version, it may look a little different. And then Google also has a presentation type program that's called Google Slides. And so just know some of that may look a little different just because certainly Microsoft and Google are different companies and entities. So their layout's going to look a little different. And sometimes when you're working on PowerPoint in the cloud or it's saved up there as opposed to like your desktop application, some things may be a little different. But for the most part, a lot of this is going to hold true. So like I mentioned, if you go to that insert ribbon, so up here at the top, PowerPoint gives us a lot of different options, that insert ribbon, and then there's this smart art feature. And so once you click on that there, it pops open that screen that you saw earlier that just kind of gives you lots of different smart art examples. And so you can certainly scroll through and see there's a lot that exist. I have been known a time or two to select a graphic and then I get into it and realize that's actually not what I want. And so I go back and change it, which is completely acceptable as well. So we're going to pilot a couple of these together. So let's just say here is a process and it shows, if we look at the little descriptor, and I realize it may be hard for you to see, but it says this is a basic process used to show a progression or sequential steps in a task, a process, or a workflow. So I click OK. Unless you have something that may be like, university related with colors or fonts or shapes or something like that, typically it just defaults to this beautiful Microsoft blue, but you do have the ability to change these colors. And so we'll talk a little bit about how to do that. So right now, over on this left side, you're going to see this little box. And I like to use this to do all of my typing rather than actually typing in the boxes themselves. And so if I wanted to just build a presentation here, I could come in and it defaults to 3 little boxes. And so I have a step 1, a step 2, and a step 3. Now, if I want to add more over here on this side, when I do an enter, it simply will add that fourth box for me, and I can continue to press enter. And what's really great is Microsoft PowerPoint is going to format these in such a way that it doesn't mess up any sizes or shapes or things like that, the more I just keep adding those boxes. Now, if I want to delete them, same kind of thing is true. I keep clicking delete, delete, so on and so forth, and just can continue to add or remove as necessary. I'm actually going to come in here and delete these in the background just so they don't clog up our space. But here we go. We have our two little boxes, step 1 and step 2. Now, if we want to come back and do any edits, when we click on this graphic as a whole, that little box pops up over here and we have the ability to do that. Now, sometimes as we're doing planning, so under step 1, if we want to say, do a welcome, do introductions, depending upon the SmartArt, this is not true for all of them, but you can potentially add things like some subbullets, which may be potentially helpful. Again, just thinking about your audience and how much you choose to share with them. And if step 2 is just smile and teach, and step 3 is to clean up, you can add as much or as little as you like. Again, I didn't have to add boxes and text boxes and all that kind of stuff. Microsoft did it all for me. And then what's really cool is if I want to make this bigger, I can just click on the graphic as a whole and drag these out so that they do fill up my screen. What's really nice is that here's kind of the basics. So simple. If I want to come in and do something like changing the font, I can highlight this text just like I would with something else, and I could change the font. I could come in and change the color. If I wanted to highlight something, I have the ability to do that. If I want to change the shape color, that also is going to be there. So you can really have as much fun as you like, just depending upon what you're trying to accomplish. Now, I do not recommend this orange and yellow and red colored concoction that I just made. This is mainly just to show you, hey, here's some cool things that could potentially happen. The best part, though, is if I have all this information here, I can copy it so that I have it saved there on my clipboard. But let's say I'm not too sure how I don't know if I like this SmartArt here. So if I put in a new slide, I can come back to this little insert tab, this SmartArt on the ribbon there. And let's say I want to look at something else. So maybe I decide, maybe this should be a cycle instead. So I can open this cycle up. I can come over here. Sometimes it naturally hides for us, so you just use that little caret arrow to the left or the right. I could come back, come to my top and hit paste, and then that information could be represented in another way. It just depends on what I find and what I'd like to do. And if I only want there to be 3 steps, again, I can delete those extra circles there so that it shows kind of this cycle instead of more of a linear type process. If I also think those font colors and everything are absolutely hideous, I can go back to my home screen here, change it to something that I like, maybe make everything white again, change my one little orange circle back to blue, make it all match again. So one more thing that kind of pops up on your SmartArt ribbon when that is available to you is that you do have the ability to change like some color themes. Let me actually open up another whole slide to do this. One of my favorites is the list, especially because you can do photos, which is kind of cool. So it may pull up something like this that you see right here. This is on the SmartArt design ribbon. So this is a little bit different than that insert ribbon or home ribbon that you saw earlier. But here I actually have the ability to change the entire kind of like color scheme. Or if I wanted to stick in some of those default colors, but maybe I want it to look a little bit more like gradient like, or kind of reverse it so that the background is white and the border is colored. That gives you a lot of options as well. So don't think you have to be a super expert by any means. It kind of all does it for us. And then what's neat is I can come over here and I can have text. And so again, same kind of thing, whatever I want to type, I have the ability to type that in. If I decide, oh, I only want 2, that works for me as well. And then some of our SmartArt actually gives you the ability to put a picture. And I just clicked too fast. So let's X out of that. And I will slow down because I got a little excited there. So let's try this again. Click on that. And it gives us the ability to add a picture. So if I have pictures that are saved on my local computer, I have the ability to do that. There's also stock images, and you could search online as well. So this pulls up my pictures, no judgment zone, because that's how this works. But scientist at heart. So let's pull up some tree diseases, because tree diseases are cool, right? Black knot on cherry. We could hit insert on this particular picture. And now there it is within my SmartArt. What's really cool is if I want to move all this around, it all moves with it. So I don't have to worry about reformatting or sizing things. And then, of course, we're not going to call it Kasey. If we actually want to call it black knot, which is what it is, we can rename it there. So one last cool thing, and then I see some things popping up in the chat box. I don't actually know what they say yet because I have it hidden, but I'm gonna come to it. I promise. This is like my coolest or my favorite is part about all the things. All right, y'all just have to entertain me for a hot minute because I have to have another picture there too. What about some lichen? All right, so we're going to come over here. We're not going to call it Bozeman. We're going to call it lichen instead. So real fun story. And then I promise we'll keep talking about graphic organizers. But years ago, I was good friends with a 4-H agent in a metro area of Georgia. And she was working with her students on wildlife judging in the wildlife habitat education program. And she was at the second floor of the public library, kind of in the heart of the city, and was telling the students that the white-tailed deer may eat lichen as part of their diet. And the kids were like, what is lichen? What is lichen? She's like, oh, you know, it's this symbiotic relationship and blah, 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 blah. She's like, oh, look right out the window right there. There's some lichen on this tree. And the kid, as serious as can be, it was like, how does the deer climb the tree to get the lichen? Because here they are on the second floor of the library. Like, spoiler alert, they don't. They're only going to eat lichen that's accessible to them. But good answer or question, kid, because we're going to help you answer it. And that's what we do in extension. So I always think about, like, how about lichen? How's the deer climb the tree? Good questions from kiddos. So this is the cool part. Last thing we'll talk about is animations in PowerPoint. So let's say you are talking about different diseases of trees and you want to make all of this happen. So let's say you want them to float in. Well, by default, PowerPoint makes everything float together, which is cool and great and wonderful because that's what PowerPoint does. But what's really neat is you can come over here under effect options and it can do it one by one, which is my favorite thing in the world. And then it's also triggered so that it happens on click. So what that means is that if I'm going to come and I'm going to do a presentation about different things, instead of that entire graphic organizer popping up at once, I, as that presenter, can control how fast those different images come into my slides. Now, here's the deal. I could have worked really hard and found the picture of black knot and formatted a text box and all of that kind of stuff. But SmartArt lets you do a lot of this for you, which is to me the coolest part about this. I'm so sorry I shut off my share screen again because I'm just being a dork like that. But what's really great is that here you can come back. If you don't like something, you just simply delete it. It goes away. If you want to add something, you have the ability to do that. My biggest suggestion is that we learn by doing things. So try to hop into PowerPoint yourself, play around in there. I will tell you, I believe Travis shares my contact information, but reach out if you have questions or ideas, or I want to make something happen. How do I do it? There are plenty of times when I'm designing PowerPoints and presentations and things like that, that I just start clicking around and I look at what PowerPoint offers and I think, oh, this will work for me or this won't work for me. And it really goes back to, again, thinking about a great visual aid is going to consider that audience, that environment, and that message. So I think y'all have already learned I'm not good at being quiet and I like to talk at super fast speed. But I saw a comment about somebody saying, and I'm going to read this just aloud for the sake of a recording. And I appreciate Lori sharing this with the group that if you're planning on exporting the graphic organizer to a document that's going to be shared digitally, saving the graphic organizer as a single JPEG, making sure that you add the alternative text that is going to so that it transfers all within your graphic organizer, which is a super great tip for accessibility and things like that. One thing I did not mention, and I apologize, I got too excited, but let's say that you're going to work with a group and you want to actually create a graphic organizer that is going to be used as a handout, right? Or it is going to be part of an assessment or something that you go to print out. So when you do insert SmartArt, let's say, again, you're going to do process and you find one of the processes that looks really fun to you. So it defaults into 5, but you're going to print it for people. So you're going to change that up a little bit. And then let's say over here, though, you want it to be like 6. So you kind of see that text is in the brackets. If you just add a space, it'll go away. It's not going to display, just like where it says click to add title. If we were to print that out, it's not going to display. But for me and my inability to focus on things, I like for that to go away. So when I add it, to get it to go away, I just kind of do a space. And then again, the more I want, I can just keep adding those boxes. Or if I need to delete them, I have the ability to do that as well. And so you can kind of play around. So if you wanted to show a 4-step process and you included text for step 2, you have the ability to kind of add text in some, but not all. So that way, when I talked about when you give somebody a graphic organizer, it could potentially be partially filled or, completely blank, just depending upon what you want to do, considering your audience and environment and message. So that's also a fun little tip there as well. That was a lot of talking on my end, and I am completely self-reflective and know that, but happy to answer any other thoughts or questions. I probably could play around with the SmartArt feature all day long, but I'll tell you something that I try to do very intentionally is that when I am presenting content and information, and a lot of times that does happen via PowerPoint, and a lot of times it happens virtually just because of the nature of my job. But I do try to spend time of thinking of how's the best way to organize this in such a way that it resonates with my audience. And so it is probably something that may not necessarily feel natural or comfortable to you, but I do hope that you kind of play around. I hope this was a good way for you to get your feet wet, if you will, and see how this could be potentially applicable in your own work. There's really not a right or wrong way to do it. Just some final thoughts before I go, because I get this question a lot and would be happy to answer it for you, is that people ask me all the time, like, hey, how do you make your slides so pretty and things like that? I use a couple different websites to do that. My favorite being Slides Go, or Slides Carnival. And so a lot of times they have the fonts already figured out for you and the colors and things like that. With Slides Go, you do have to have an account, and you can download anywhere from like 5 to 10 PowerPoints a month. Slides Carnival, it's unlimited. So it's just easy things that are kind of already set for me. But this was a SmartArt feature right there in PowerPoint. So for my final thoughts today, and why graphic organizers are important, certainly I do think you have to keep it simple. Less is more. And really our goal is to communicate likely quickly, but certainly effectively as well. And if you have questions at all for me, feel free to put those in the chat or ask those aloud. And I'm always happy if you're working on something and need a little bit of assistance or guidance, or this is what I want to make happen and it's just not quite working for me. Feel free to reach out and let me know. But I certainly appreciate the time to be here today. I appreciate the great work that you do as extension professionals, because it is tough work. And hopefully this is just one little tool that we can put in that large toolbox that I feel like some days has to get bigger and bigger. But as you work on certainly presentations and connecting with your audiences, if graphic organizers and using SmartArt is a way that could be more helpful for you, please don't hesitate to reach out. I have certainly had a fun. It's afternoon here in Georgia, but I have a sister that lives in Idaho, so she always tells me she feels like she's about 2 hours late than the family, which is true. So thank y'all again, though, for joining in. I'm happy to stick around and answer questions if you want to put those in the chat or ask those aloud. And Travis, I appreciate your leadership in coordinating this time together today.
Well, no problem. Thank you very much, Kasey, for those tips. Again, Kasey said she would stick around. I know we're up against 2 o'clock, so if you have to go, we totally understand. But if you have some questions and you want to stick around, I'm sure Kasey also will entertain those via email. That will be included in the PowerPoint as well as the recording when I send that email out. So if you get in there and get stuck or have some questions, I'm sure Kasey would be more than willing to help you. So anybody have any lingering questions today? Okay, if not, I would just remind you, be on the lookout for the 1st of October. We'll be promoting our webinar series starting in October as well. So we have a new lineup of some great topics that we're excited to unveil. So once we get past the national meeting in Montana, the end of September, you'll see some messages coming from ESP to promote those workshops for, I guess, fall and winter is what I would call sort of that series. So.
Hey, Travis, I did see a quick question about using things like Canva or other
Oh.
resources. And I'll just kind of give you the unofficial Kasey Bozeman version. I do play around in Canva, and they do have some great things in there as well. One of my just reservations, hesitations with Canva is that it is all web based, and sometimes when you don't have a strong internet connection, there can be a lot of lag to Canva. The other thing is that when you do a presentation in Canva, you can download it and present it offline, but when you do that, the like any animations that you have, unless the update has changed, so just know I'm speaking based on some past experiences, the animations don't always stay. And so I have done some things where I've made something in Canva and then like exported it to PowerPoint, only because I have a little bit just biased, if you will, towards PowerPoint and that ability to not worry about, especially like if I'm already on Zoom. And so I know that's part of like my bandwidth. And then I have to get on Canva and pull stuff from a cloud to try to present. It gives me a lot of anxiety. Somebody talked about accessibility issues with Canva. I've heard some of that is true. Somebody threw in here about animations not being retained in Canva. So I think that is still true. Canva definitely helps me with photo things or graphic-y things. And there's been times for sure I have made something in Canva, whether it was like one image or kind of a series of slides or images, but ultimately put them in PowerPoint to do the presentation part. And really that's more personal preference. And I have always kind of just figured out how to make PowerPoint work for me. And so I will probably likely continue doing that. But I am fortunate to have the Canva EDU account, and our university has the Canva for Teams enterprise experience. So there's a lot of great features that are there, both in some of the free things, and then if you have higher level accounts, it just for me, I tend to go back to putting it all in PowerPoint though to be able to use.